Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining our seminar today. We're going to talk about 4K Ultra HD TV. Just some housekeeping. The seminar will last approximately an hour. If you have questions during the seminar, please post them to the chat box. They will be answered after the webinar via email. Secondly, we will make a recording available of this presentation. And third, we will also make a Acrobat PDF file available of the slides. And for those of you who have CTS designation and are looking for renewal units, this class is worth 1 RU. And that can be arranged by contacting Jamie Kelleher at Kramer Electronics when you email in for the PDFs, and she will send you an electronic certificate which you can add to your CTS file online through Infocom. So without further ado, let's get started on this rainy afternoon here in New Jersey. I hope the weather's better where you are. We're frankly drowning out here. Yes, I heard a laugh in the other room. And just also one last piece of housekeeping. There will be an updated version of this class taught next week at Infocom. If you want to sign up for it, some of the material in here will be covered next week. But it's easy to find. Look for UHD TV is here. Deal with it. That's the name of the class. The designation is ISO 60, so Infocom Seminar 060. So certainly 4K and Ultra HD TV has been on everybody's lips the last few years. It's a technology and a new way of communicating that's come upon us very, very quickly. And as usual, as I like to say, the marketing people have gotten way out ahead of it, and there's a lot of misinformation being spread about what it actually means. So to talk and just to show you how quickly everything is changing, the first Ultra HD TV sets hit our shores, back in 2012, and these were all the 84-inch LG display panel. At 2013, when I say swamped, UHD TV did swamp completely at CES. Everybody was talking about it. Then we saw the curved screen Ultra HD TV show up at CES the year after that. That's the vanity part of the transition. And then all the manufacturers joined in. So the Chinese, Japanese, Korean TV manufacturers, so much so that by last year, it had actually become passé at CES. So when we walked around and talked about, did you see the new TV in the Samsung booth or the Hisense booth, it was taken for granted that we were referring to Ultra HD TV. And this year, we now have Ultra HD TV and wide color gamut and high dynamic range. So technologies like quantum dots are the next big thing. We'll talk about them in a little bit. Multiple standards for reproducing high dynamic range on both professional and consumer displays. And the Chinese, which are now basically the kingmakers in television manufacturing, introducing super cheap 4K TVs. The significance of that is that the prices for commercial displays will fall. So some trends in 2017. We all know that consumer electronics hardware has become cheaper and it's largely commoditized at this point. It's something you buy, use for a few years, and you throw it away. Most manufacturing is moving to China, Taiwan, Southeast Asia, places like Vietnam, Cambodia, and there's still some manufacturing going on in Korea. Display manufacturing costs are plummeting. It is actually never been cheaper to make really large cuts of glass to use in a display. And as a result, the manufacturers are switching to larger display sizes with higher resolution. In 2015, worldwide TV shipments declined. That was a 4-year pattern, and they continued to decline over the last 2 years. But in that same time period, shipments of Ultra HD TVs increased 173% year to year over 2015, while retail prices dropped by nearly 30%. So to give you an idea of just how fast things are falling, if you look, this is the numbers for last year. Not surprisingly, Samsung has about a third of the market in the #1 position. Vizio was #2, LG's #3. They since swapped positions. Sony's #4, and then two companies you might not have heard of, TCL and Hisense, are #5 and 6. But these are fast-growing Chinese companies, and in fact, if you have a large TV at home that you bought, 4K or 1080p in the last year or so, it's a pretty good chance that the display glass that's in it actually came out of China and not out of Japan and not out of Korea. So these guys control the bulk of the market, and about 18% of it is others, just other companies that are pushing into, and this is strictly Ultra HD TVs, 4K TVs. And I mentioned before the prices are dropping like a rock. So just some random looks through flyers in the newspaper. Here's Haier. They make great wine refrigerators. They apparently also make televisions. So here's a 48-inch Ultra HD TV set for $250. A Vizio 43-inch with smart functions for $380. A Haier 65-inch for $550. Sharp, which is now a brand licensed by Hisense, a 55-inch for $600. A Sony 49-inch for $650. A Sony 49-inch with HDR in it for $750. A Samsung with HDR and Smart TV for $800. A Vizio 65 for $850. So think about it. We can buy now an Ultra HD TV set that's 65 inches with internet capability for $850. And back in 2012, those 84-inch Ultra HD TV sets cost $20,000 to $25,000. If you want to spend a little extra money, you can get a 55-inch HDR set for $1,100, a Samsung 65 for $1,200, an LG 65 for $1,400, a Samsung 65 for $1,700, a Sony 65 for $1,800, an OLED, organic light emitting diode TV for $2,000, a 75-inch for $2,500. A 75-inch TV was largely inconceivable 5 years ago, and now it's a consumer product. A 65-inch smart high dynamic range OLED TV for $3,000. So you can buy a 1080p LCD set for as little as $250. And remember, LCD TVs really didn't take off till about 2005, 2006. So barely 10 years later, they've dropped down to $250. A small 4K set for less than $400. A large smart TV for less than $600. A large UHD LCD with high dynamic range for about $1,000. A 55-inch OLED for $2,000, and a 75-inch TV for $2,500. And most of the panels in these TVs are coming out of China. The OLED panels are all being made by LG Display in Korea. So whenever you look at a large OLED, they're all coming out of the same factory. So at this year's CES, and we have to pay attention to CES because what happens there determines what happens in our market ultimately. The price parity between Full HD and Ultra HD results in consumers going for the 4K upgrade. So 1080p sets are slowly disappearing, which is more shelf space for the Ultra HD sets. And now we have high dynamic range and wide color gamut as the next big things coming to television. Screen sizes are increasing. 10 years ago, a 42-inch TV or monitor was considered a large display. A 42-inch set now is something that winds up in the kid's bedroom. The sweet spot's 55 inches, and that's edging towards 60 inches. And we're now starting to see some of the enhancements that are a result of 4K are now migrating into desktop monitors. I'll show those to you in a moment. And we're not stopping at Ultra HD. We're now starting to see 8K displays come to market. So here's a 77-inch TV, super thin, about 5 millimeters thick. It's organic light emitting diode technology. It's Ultra HD resolution. It's a white OLED with color filters. So this is LG's technology. The backlights are all white OLEDs, and then they use color filters in front of them to give you red, green, and blue. You can actually mount this to a wall with hooks and magnets. So that TV is actually on a larger piece of glass. You may be able to see the edges of it there that's transparent. It has a companion soundbar with telescoping speakers. 65-inch model's about $8,000. They haven't released a price yet on the 77. Samsung announced this year their QLEDs, and they are going to commercialize this technology, so don't be surprised to see it next week at InfoComm. Quantum dots, quantum dot illumination to give high dynamic range, really saturated, really bright colors. So they use these quantum dots, and I'll explain how those work in a moment, with blue light emitting diodes, and they can get peak brightness. This is not a white screen. This would be a specular highlight, such as the sun reflecting off water. 2,000 candelas per square meter, as opposed to a CRT TV that could possibly do maybe 100. They can cover 100% of the DCI P3 color space, which is way bigger than the 709 color space we currently use for HD. They've improved the off-angle viewing access for color and contrast, but it's still a photo-emissive technology, not electro-emissive like an OLED. I mentioned before this technology is migrating to desktop. So here's a Samsung curved CF791 monitor. It has 3440 by 1800 resolution, not quite 4K, a little bit less, but it uses the quantum dot blue LEDs and red-green quantum dots to give you highly saturated colors, a wide color gamut, and high dynamic range. It can refresh as fast as 100 times a second, and it has 125% coverage of the sRGB color space with only a 4 millisecond response time. So these monitors will probably be very popular for gamers and people doing virtual reality. A company you probably never heard of, China Electronics Corporation. Their mascot is the panda, not surprisingly. They showed a 98-inch 8K TV and module, meaning that this is available to anybody that wants to build it into a television. So it's a 98-inch display using indium gallium zinc oxide to switch all the pixels on and off. And most of these panels are coming out of two factories. These 8K panels are either coming out of the LG display factory in Korea, or they're coming out of a company called Innolux in China. So CEC is now making a panel, an 8K panel. Where would you put it? Well, 98 inches for people that live in some cities would probably be one entire wall of their house. Sony's now got organic light emitting diode TVs. These are using the LG panels. They have 65-inch and 77-inch models. They also sell commercial models of these for what's called a green room or a client monitor for broadcast and production applications. And to show you how big we can get, this is a Lieco 120-inch diagonal TV. I would not want to be the guy that actually has to move this thing. Sharp makes the panels in Japan, and Sharp now is owned by Hanhai Precision Industries, and they are the company that brought you Foxconn. So they actually own Sharp, and they are building a fab in China to build this glass over there. So the production in Japan will probably shut down, and these panels will be made in China, and the price will continue to fall on them. So that's just to give you an idea of how far we've come in the last 5 years. We've gone from something that was an exotic technology to something that's a mainstream technology. And in fact, if you're considering buying a television sometime in the next year, and if you are, wait till the Super Bowl, because that's when the prices are lowest, chances are you are probably going to buy a 4K TV. You're not going to buy a 1080p set, and it'll be a bigger TV than you've ever had. So let's talk about some of the basics. We understand some of the terminology. I would like any of you that go to Infocom to be able to answer some of the marketing BS by understanding the acronyms and what they stand for and what they really mean. So there's a bunch of questions we need to answer, and I hope to answer all of them in this seminar. First of all, Ultra HD TV, which is really the correct name for it, is more than just additional pixels. What screen sizes are we going to use for it? What are our viewing distances? Which display technologies will we use to show UHD TV? All right, I've heard about high dynamic range. What is it? When will it arrive? How will the new wider color space for TV be reproduced? What about Ultra HD in a projector? Are HDMI and DisplayPort fast enough to transport an Ultra HD signal? Are there other options? Is 8-bit color reproduction sufficient to show an Ultra HD TV signal? Where will the content come from to show on these new displays? How will we use it in things like tile displays and digital signage? Well, you don't need to memorize this chart. There won't be a test on it, but this gives you a comparison of the pixel pitch versus resolution and screen size. So for a 1080p set that's 55 inches diagonal, the pixel is going to be about 1 millimeter. And by the way, there are LED video walls now that are actually finer pitched than that. So it shows you how far those have come. For 1080p pixels, it drops to 0.6 millimeters. For 2K, it drops to 0.6. 4K is 0.3, 8K is 0.15. So what this means, you can actually sit closer to the screen. I got a little note there. We don't have any audio. We should be live with audio. If there's anybody else that's having a problem with audio, let me know. So a 55-inch 1080p set, show you how these viewing distances work out, has a recommended viewing distance of 3 times the screen height. That's from the original specification for 1080i. So for a 55-inch 1080p TV, 3 times the screen height is 81 inches. That's 6.75 feet viewing distance. Most of us sit a lot further away from our TVs than that. So if we change that same 55-inch set to Ultra HD, which is 4 times the pixels, we've now cut that distance in half. So for a 55-inch 2160p TV, we're now sitting 40.54 inches away. And what that number really means is that's the distance at which you start to see the pixel structure in the television. Not necessarily that you can't sit that close, but you may become aware that there's actually a pixel structure at 3.4 feet. Well, if we go to 8K, which is 4 times what we have at Ultra HD, we can now sit as close as 1.7 feet to the display. And for those of you who are old enough to remember your mother telling you to move away from the TV, don't sit so close to it, you'll ruin your eyes. Well, now we're telling you, well, you can sit very close to the TV and you won't ruin your eyes. Ultra HD comes in many flavors. We call it 4K, sometimes incorrectly. We call it Ultra HD, Ultra HD TV. At one point I compiled, I think, 20 different expressions for what 4K is. So there's a bunch of different displays that would qualify. Televisions use something called Ultra HD. it's not really 4K. It's 4 times 1080p. Uses the same aspect ratio, 1.77 to 1. Then we have Cinema 4K, which is 4096 by 2160. Then we have some unusual formats like the Panasonic 4K Toughbook, which is 3840 by 2550. Then we have widescreen 4K LCD TVs that have a CinemaScope arrangement, and they're 5120 by 2160. And then some computer monitors that are actually 5K resolution. Yes, those are available. You can go beyond 4K. So here's a comparison. So the most common implementation of this is Ultra HD. It has 4 times the resolution of a 1080p signal, which is 8,294,000 pixels. With the blanking interval, it's not 3840 by 2160. It's actually 4400 by 2250 pixels. That number is significant because that affects the clock speed when we move one of these signals through a display interface. And we'll show you how that can cause us problems in a little bit. If we go to Cinema 4K, we're just going to make the screen a little bit bigger. So the viewing distance is about half. Is there really an advantage to it? Well, not in small displays, except if you're doing workstation graphics, if you're doing post-production editing, then you do need to be close to it and see all the detail that's in the image. So Cinema 4K just gets a little bit wider. The aspect ratio changes slightly to 1.89 to 1, but the vertical resolution is still the same. And this is what all the cameras use. So anytime anybody's shooting professional video for cinema, for video productions, and some consumer cameras will shoot 4096 by 2160. We saw these briefly at CES. They haven't really come to market, but these were curved super wide screens. So what they did was they just extended the edges out to 5120 pixels by 2160. This gives you a CinemaScope aspect ratio of 2.3 to 1. Again, they really have not caught on, and they're not particularly cheap. But this concept is actually downsizing to computer monitors. It's proved to be a lot more popular there. The tablet I mentioned earlier, 2560 by 3840. This is a 15 by 10 aspect ratio, almost the same as regular television used to be. And these 5K monitors that are coming out. LG Display has a 5K monitor. Apple sells it. It's 5120 by 2880. Now we're talking about 14,745,600 pixels. Again, a lot of data to move through a display interface. And when we talk about 8K, then it really starts to get ridiculous. That's 16 times the resolution of a 1080p signal. So it's 32 million, almost 33 million pixels, 7680 by 4320, but it's the same aspect ratio. These are all viable formats. There are displays that are made in all these formats. At the present time, it takes lots of display connections to drive them because you have so much data that's pouring into the screen. NHK in Japan has taken the lead with 8K. They call it Super High Vision. They've been broadcasting it since 2012. They shot the 2012, 2014, and then the 2016 Olympics last year with Super High Vision cameras. And if you see the little camera sitting in somebody's hand, that weighs about 4 pounds, and that is a true 7680 4320 camera, an 8K camera with 2.8 by 2.8 micrometer pixels. They actually had to build their own sensors. It can shoot up to 120 hertz, so it can do fast motion. It requires 12 bits. Well, you're talking about 96 gigabits a second coming out of the interface uncompressed, which is a ton of data. And at this year's NAB, NHK showed some demos of just how spectacular 8K can look. So on the left, they created a living room with an 85-inch 8K display. And to go with it, they have their own 22-channel surround sound. It's similar to Dolby Atmos. And when you sit there, you're watching this performance by the Tokyo Symphony. And several people said, this is actually better than any virtual reality demo I've ever seen because I feel like I'm actually sitting in the audience and the orchestra's right in front of me, especially since the sound appears at different three-dimensional spaces and you feel like you can grab it. Another demo they did was showing 60 hertz video versus 120 hertz. So 120 hertz high frame rate. That's another enhancement that 4K is bringing along, being able to watch fast motion sports and events with no blur whatsoever or extremely low levels of blur. So we've covered the pixel ends of it and the different aspect ratios. Now we get into the good stuff, the big three, the enhancements coming to television. The first being high dynamic range. You can already buy high dynamic range TVs. This is the easiest thing to show to anybody because your eye sees it right away. And your eye has a phenomenal range of contrast. In steady state mode, when it's not flicking around the room and it sees a bright object and a dark object, it's about 5,000, 6,000 to 1. But because your iris is constantly changing, the actual dynamic range is several tens of thousands to 1 and might even be over 100,000 to 1. Depends on your own sensitivity. So why not do high dynamic range? So on the left is a standard photo captured with good dynamic range using the 709 color space, but you can't see any shadow detail in the foreground, and things in the clouds are starting to wash out. But on the right side, you can see a lot of shadow detail. The colors are more punchy, and you can see the clouds very clearly against the blue sky. But there's a catch. To do this, you can't use 8-bit color. And broadcast, DVD, cable, Blu-ray, streaming, everything is based on 8-bit color. But we can't use 8-bit color anymore if we're going to do HDR. We need at least 10 bits, and preferably even 12-bit color to make it work. So this year at NAB, there are already products for it. AJA showed their little 4K HDR recorder player, which has a little 4K HDR monitor on it, which is a very cool product. There they're showing HDR recorded using the hybrid log gamma format. I'll explain that in a minute. In the middle, layered with a 4K HDR LED wall. They don't really need to say high dynamic range with LEDs. LEDs are high dynamic range. The so-called fine pitch or velvet LED walls typically have a pitch below 1.5 millimeter and can produce images with brightness in excess of 1,000 candelas per square meter. On the right, TV Logic was showing a 4K HDR grading monitor, which is cool because it has two separate LCD panels, one for the color imaging and one to act like a light shutter. And that gives you better blacks when it drops down to black, and it keeps it from going gray. It gives you almost an OLED performance. And this monitor will be capable of producing peak specular highlights of about 2,000 candelas per square meter. And there's an alliance. Every year at CES, there's an alliance that's announced. This is a consumer alliance of TV manufacturers. So to qualify a UHD display for HDR, it has to have at least 3840 by 2160 resolution. It needs to process 10-bit video using a wide color gamut. And that's accomplished by using something called the ITU Recommendation BT 2020 color space. I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. The display has to reproduce more than 90% of the digital cinema P3 colors. And he used what's called the SMPTE ST2084 electro-optical transfer function. This is a standard for converting what you see in a camera to luminance levels on a display. So for a display to qualify under this specification, it has to be able to achieve better than 1,000 candelas per square meter, or nits as it's often known, for peak brightness and less than 0.05 nits for black level. That would be characteristic of an LCD. Or 540 nits peak brightness and 0.0005 nits black, which is almost impossible to measure for an organic light emitting diode. And by the way, that latter specification is over 1,000,000 to 1 contrast. For distribution, this primarily pertains to optical disc, but it could pertain to streaming. There's a really loose specification. Again, it just specifies a resolution that it has to be 10-bit, use the 2020 color space, and SMPTE 2084, but that specification does not discuss things like support for high frame rates, which will be coming to televisions, and definitions of the supported color resolution modes. They are assuming 420, which is a color mode that we've used for years for everything: broadcast, optical disc, streaming, cable, satellite. So we may need to use something better than 420. We may need increased color resolution. To do high dynamic range, and again, you don't need to read all this. This is kind of legalese, but in the HDR specification that the Consumer Technology Association came up with, called 861.3, it basically says that in the info frame area in the EDID block that comes through a connection with HDMI or display port, there is an additional bit of metadata in there that signals the display that this is HDR content. So you'll see an extension like A, which is for basic HDR, or B, which is for Dolby Vision, or G, which is for hybrid log gamma. So if a display supports 861.3 and is an HDR display, it will know how to set up the peak brightness and wherever black is based on the metadata that comes from the media that's being played into it. That could be off optical disc, it could be streaming, it could be a broadcast received over the air through a cable system. And 5 high dynamic range systems were being proposed as of a year or so ago. Dolby, which is available now on selected Blu-ray discs, called Dolby Vision, and LG Vizio and TCL support it in some of their Ultra HD TVs. Technicolor has a dual system that combines both high dynamic range and standard dynamic range in mastering and signal transport. That's really more getting from point A to point B. It's not likely you'll see it in a television, but some manufacturers support it. BBC and NHK came up with something called hybrid log gamma. There's no metadata required. It's just a gamma curve. Your TV reproduces as much of the gamma curve that it can. It's supposed to be compatible with broadcasting. Samsung has something called HDR10+, which is scene-based dynamic tone mapping. It's basically a different approach to what Dolby is doing, being able to change from scene to scene where the peak brightness is and where the shadow details are. And then Philips proposed the same thing as Technicolor, a single stream with both high dynamic range and standard dynamic range. And those two proposals were combined in early 2016. So we basically have 4 that we're looking at: Dolby Vision, Technicolor, BBC, hybrid log gamma, and Samsung's HDR10+. So to get this to the home, the specification, as I showed you, includes both LCD and OLED displays. Each can reproduce an HDR signal, but LCDs can't do it without some turbocharging. So they need an enhanced backlight. They either need lots more white pixels, which sacrifices a little bit of color resolution to get higher peak brightness, or use something like a quantum dot. And organic light emitting diodes do it very easily because they have extremely low gray levels and just blend right smoothly into black. So from just above black up to peak white can be over 1,000,000 to 1. But the specification does not include display interfacing, and this is a bit of a roadblock. It doesn't do you any good to have a Ferrari if you live on a road with a lot of potholes in it. That's a serious roadblock for HDR viewing. So gaming, virtual, and augmented reality users are already jumping on the HDR bandwagon. You could author that content at higher resolution for computers. That increases the clock rate. We have PC displays available with 5K resolution. That increases the clock rate. We're doing super wide displays with higher resolution. That increases the clock rate. And the VR and augmented reality guys are saying we probably need more than 10 bits. We might need 12 bits per pixel to be able to do high frame rate, or maybe 16 bits, and we need higher resolution. I was told by one person in that area that they think they need almost 11 million pixels per eye to really do a good job with VR. So if you were one of those unfortunate people that bought an HDR TV before 2016, your TV is not going to recognize HDR content because it will not know what to do with the metadata. But you're going to see a huge rollout of it this year on 2017 models, and most of them adoption of the Dolby Vision Technicolor format, which require licensing. Samsung's is free. Hybrid log gamma is just a gamma curve, so it's easy to support it. Most Ultra HD TVs offer only 1 or 2 HDMI 2 inputs. You need 2.0A support for HDR10, which is the most basic implementation of high dynamic range, and version B for Dolby Vision and version G for hybrid log gamma. So what we're starting to see is some display manufacturers adding DisplayPort because it is faster than HDMI to be able to do things like gaming and deeper color resolution. So at AB, Harmonic was a big deal making transcoding from HDR10 to hybrid log gamma. So being able to take one format and then convert it to another format. This is useful if you want to take HDR content and just send it to as a standard gamma curve to a TV that may not recognize HDR10. Here's a display of NEC, a prototype encoder. They're encoding 4K. This is 4096 2160 video. And they're streaming it at 77 megabits a second with only 99 milliseconds of latency. And this is using the HEVC, the High Efficiency Video Codec, otherwise known as H.265. I will be talking about that next week during my AV over IT class. So these are great. They really add to the experience and enhance what we see on the screen. But they create some problems. We're mastering content at different brightness levels. Dolby Vision wants to master everything at 4,000 candelas per square meter. That's roughly the brightness of an LED sign outdoors at a stadium. Quantum dot equipped LCDs can maybe hit 1,000. Now we're starting to see 2,000. And the OLEDs can hit maybe 800 peak, but sustained probably 400 or 500. So how do you interpolate 4,000 nits peak brightness to 1,800 nits? You can do it on the fly, which is what Dolby Vision does. They create a custom lookup table for every display. You can interpolate from SDR to HDR in the same stream. That's a Technicolor system. Use dynamic tone mapping, shift the highlights around per scene as Samsung does. Or just take your best guess as a gamma curve and send it out and hope the TV will reproduce it correctly, which is how hybrid log gamma works. So, great. We got a lot to think about there, but what are we going to show it on? What are our options as far as display technology? Well, next generation LCDs, I mentioned quantum dots. If you look down in the lower picture, you will see both red and green quantum dots. Those are actually floating in a suspension of liquid, and they're sitting on a black light. If you turn the black light off, it would just be clear. You would just see through it, look like water. Quantum dots are nanoparticles, very, very tiny little particles, less than 2 nanometers, that are made out of metals. You can make them out of anything, lead, zinc, but we found that the 2 compounds that work the best are cadmium selenide and indium phosphide. So what happens is you make an array of these things as a film. It's a very thin film, and it goes in the LCD stack behind the backlight. Blue LED light passing through it gives you the blue pixels on the screen. That blue LED also provides the energy to kickstart the quantum dots. And where the quantum part comes in is when lots of blue photons hammer these little particles, they emit extremely intense, very saturated, very narrowband color. You can tune them. You make them to a precise size, and they will give you a very specific color of green and red. You can even make blue quantum dots if you want. And we now have native 10-bit addressable panels coming from Asia. So the LCD panels and the OLED panels are 10-bit addressable, not 8-bit as they were for so many years. So we've basically created a display that can handle HDR. It'll get a 10-bit signal and address it as 10 bits. And the quantum dots will provide the extra horsepower we need to get the really saturated, bright colors. As far as OLEDs, again, pretty much all the OLEDs that you're going to see, the big ones are coming out of the LG display factory. They're white OLEDs with red, green, blue, and additional white pixel, which gives it a little bit more brightness. NEB, they've shown both client and reference monitors with OLEDs. They have better viewing angles. They're like a CRT TV or a plasma. It doesn't matter where you sit in the room. The picture quality is pretty much the same, which is not always the case with an LCD. And they switch fast enough. They can switch hundreds of times a second, so they're plenty fast enough to do high frame rate. And again, they're also manufacturing native 10-bit panels. The challenge for OLEDs are high brightness for HDR and high color saturation, because you can't get an OLED to go above a certain brightness level. It just will burn out. They will go well past the color space defined by ITU BT709 that can cover most of the DCI-P3. But the challenge if you make it is, well, how do I get more brightness on the screen? I add that extra white pixel at the end of every red, green, blue stripe. Well, that decreases the color saturation a little bit, but does boost my brightness. Or I can build a pure RGB display. That'll decrease brightness, but I'll get really better color saturation. Right now, the RGBW design has high enough yields to be able to sell as television using the phosphor color filters to get a little extra oomph. I've said this before, and I will say it again in my class. The advantage of curved displays is that they're curved. Curved displays, I will make some exceptions here. Desktop computer displays, and I'll show you some interesting applications of those, do benefit from a curve to create an immersive display. But if you're sitting 10 feet, 12 feet from a 55-inch TV and it's curved, well, if it has a high gloss finish to it, as so many of them do, that means if there's a light source in the room, like sun coming through a window or a light on, no matter where you move, you're going to see it somewhere on the screen. So the jury's still kind of out on this. What's significant about it is that the OLED technology can be made so thin, if you look at the middle picture, that's actually a television. It's a piece of film. You can roll it up in a tube. It's showing HD video, 1280 by 720 video. And you can roll this thing up and stick it in your pocket, which is pretty outrageous. So what this does give us is the ability to do large curved tiled Ultra HD displays, and digital signage will be more immersive. You'll actually be able to stand right in the middle of it. And the thin mullions are already in place. These things have super thin mullions. So for those of you who have tried VR and maybe had the Samsung Gear or the Oculus Rift and you're not really that thrilled with it, this is what you want to see. This is a real VR experience. This is a 65-inch concave OLED. So what you do is you walk right up to that little bumper there and you stand in a way so that the display actually fills your field of view. It's wrapped into a half pipe. It was being used in this case to demonstrate gaming. So one of the many shoot 'em up games out there, Call of Duty or something, using very fast refresh, high dynamic range, wide color gamut. Okay, and I can tell you that with spatial sound beaming at you from all around is way better than anything you can do with a headset. The headset displays just don't have the resolution yet, really, to be able to do it justice. But here's something that doesn't matter if you have any eye disorders, you can't stand those headsets. You just stand here, wrapped with the display wrapped around you, experiencing this amazing VR. And by the way, that substrate is only 2.5 millimeters thick. This is why they can bend it. This was a display that was shown by LG at CES. It's not something ready for production yet, but they can make it. So how are we going to reproduce HDR and wide color gamut? Okay, as I said earlier, the current display systems aren't up to the job. They're white LEDs with color filters, can barely cover 709. That's what we're using in regular LCD displays. And you can only saturate a phosphor so long before it just peaks out. So some of the candidates for next generation illumination, lasers, well, they do a really good job. They do have to be diffused. They don't get specular issues, but they're really only being used for digital cinema right now. And there's a lot of regulations from the FDA on how they can be used, how they have to be in armor-plated cables and locked, because they're so worried about somebody staring in one and burning out their eyesight. Quantum dot backlights, which we just discussed, organic light emitting diodes, and inorganic LEDs. An inorganic LED is the indicator in your computer. It's those huge LED displays. When you go to InfoComm next week, you will see them everywhere. And they're getting finer and finer in pitch. They're down to 0.9 millimeter. I expect we're going to start to see some 0.8 millimeter. So as I described earlier, the quantum dot is crystalline inorganic structures. They're chemical compounds made from metals. And you'll see the yellow film there. It's a very flexible film. It just goes right in the LCD stack. From the backlight, which is blue LEDs, and the light guides and the polarizers all the way to the front screen. So depending on the size of the quantum dot, that's the color we get out of it. We make them larger, it's longer wavelengths, and they shift towards red. Make them smaller, they shift towards green and ultimately towards blue. We can actually build these into light pipes for edge lighting or use them as a direct illumination layer, which is what most people are doing. I mentioned cadmium selenide. This is the most efficient quantum dot compound out there, but the problem is cadmium is a toxic metal, and so is selenium to a lesser extent. So in places like Europe, they have the restriction of hazardous substances. So for some markets, and I know Samsung is basically using these exclusively, they go with indium phosphide. Indium phosphide is not considered to be as toxic, even though the total amount of these little compounds that would be in a TV would probably fit in a AAA battery. And then you may find some hybrids. You may find a combination of both indium phosphide and cadmium selenide. I mention this because I expect to see next week at InfoComm some prototype commercial displays using quantum dot illumination technology. And these pictures really don't do it justice, but you can see this is a Hisense 55-inch set using an optical film that's made by Nanosys in California. They're probably the largest maker of quantum dots, and 3M, and you can just see the colors jumping off the screen there. And again, on your right, they're in liquid suspension. If you pump black light through them or blue light, they will light up. Otherwise, they just appear to be clear. So here's the color space we mentioned. The yellow line shows our current color space, which is the ITU recommendation 709. This is actually developed for phosphor TVs, but regular LCD TVs can hit a good portion of this. Some of them can't hit all of it, but they can get pretty close. The black line is 2020, and as you can see, that's a lot larger. And that's a very saturated, very deep green, very intense green color that about the only thing that can hit that at the top is a laser. Quantum dots will get you a large way there. OLEDs will get you a large way there. But it's a much bigger color space than we've ever dealt with before. If you look at the red locus in the lower right corner, that's pushed out a bit. The blue hasn't changed very much. Our eyes are very sensitive to small changes in blue, so we don't need to do much with blue. But we push the red out further and we push the green out much, much further. So to give you an idea of just how much we have to push through a display interface, for 10-bit color, that's 1 billion shades of color for 10-bit. That's 1024 by 1024 by 1024. So I mentioned earlier, is 8-bit color adequate for UHD? No, it isn't. We need to go to 10-bit color. Repeat as often as necessary. You're going to see some people jiggering with that, dithering 10 bits to 8 bits. No, it needs to be 10 bits, and it might, in some cases, need to be actually 12 bits. And then the third leg of the stool is the high frame rates. So SMPTE has 2 new standards that are being worked on, proposing new standards for high frame rate video. And that includes everything from 48 hertz, which is doubling the standard cinema rate, all the way up to 120 hertz at 4K and 8K resolutions. Now, to give you an idea just how much data that generates, an 8K signal at 120 hertz, such as they are shooting with their camera, in 422 color is 96 gigabits a second through the interface, and with 444 RGB color, 192 gigabits a second. That is a ton of data moving through the interface. It's basically optical fiber territory to get that from any point to any point. And if they're doing it, HDR and OLEDs, they do a wonderful job with the colors. On the left, a 65-inch OLED showing the P3 color space. And it isn't, by the way, just about the brightest color and going out of black. It's all the intermediate shades in the middle. We're not just doing 8-bit, we're doing 10-bit. So we've gone from 16.7 million colors to over 1 billion color shades. So there's a lot of gradations and subtle shades of color that you couldn't see before that are now viewable on these displays. Well, oh great, that's great for flat screens, and we know that emissive LEDs can do it. What about projectors? Well, the fact is that all of the 3 major imaging device platforms hit 4K resolution some time ago. So Texas Instruments has a DLP chip that's primarily restricted to use in high brightness projectors. They also have a chip that will do shifting of pixels to get additive resolution to get to 4K. Liquid crystal on silicon, if you've been to a theater that has Sony digital cinema using the SXRD technology, that's 4K. And they've been doing that for, boy, 12, 13 years now. Well, actually closer to 15 years. And then as far as high temperature polysilicon, which is basically all coming out of the Epson factory, they have shown both transmissive and reflective panels, but they haven't really deployed them on a wide basis other than home theater projectors. So the focus, oddly enough, has been on expensive home theater projectors and super high brightness projectors for theaters. So for example, Christie, Barco, you'll see them harnessing a laser light engine to drive a 4K imaging panel. So that way you can see 4K cinema with HDR and wide color gamut at even high frame rates. So there in the upper left is the prototype high temperature poly 3 LCD panel, in the middle a 4K DLP, and on the right SXRD. So these things are available. The question right now is, in a given application, would you install a large display, say like a 98-inch 4K display, or would you install a projector? And that's one of the reasons you're not seeing more of those coming to market. Now, I did just get a press release from somebody, and it may have been Dell, I don't remember, who will be showing a laser phosphor 4K projector at Infocom next week. So I expect to see a few of them at the show. They're just kind of trickling out. And here's an NEC laser DLP projector. So those are the chip lasers at the top. You'll see this technology migrate to rear projection cubes using LED light engines. You'll see 4K cubes. But again, manufacturers are largely waiting for market demand to start shipping more projectors. The inputs will be optical fiber, 12G HD SDI, which we're starting to see those ports come to market, but we don't have cable that can support it yet. HDMI 2.0, 2.1, and DisplayPort 1.3 and 1.4. Now, just like in the movie The Invasion of the Body Snatchers, people wonder, well, when's it going to start coming around me? Well, it's already here. You just didn't see it. They're here. They're infiltrating. So Lenovo's had this laptop, and this is just one of many available, for a few years. It is a 3840-2160 screen, 282 pixels per inch, and a 15.6-inch size. Using NVIDIA high-speed graphics card, it's got lots of video memory. Well, intuitively, it needs it. 4 gigs may not even be enough. You might be closer to 8 gigs. With a 1 terabyte hard drive for streaming. So the only thing I want you to focus on here is that last item in red, HDMI 1.4. Yes, you can do 4K through HDMI 1.4. I'll show you that in a minute. But that's what this is limited to. So it can do 2160p 30 using RGB color at 30 Hertz. Can't go any faster than that. Here's the 5K monitors. HP's been selling it for a while. Apple has it, but it's really the LG 27MDK5 ultrafine monitor. The static resolution is 5120 by 2880. It requires 2 DisplayPort interfaces to drive it. And you could actually convert video to this resolution and view it. There was an issue with this monitor being sensitive to, of all things, Wi-Fi access points. So I think the advisory now is you don't want to run this monitor closer than, let's say, 2 feet to a Wi-Fi access point. Smartphones, these tend to be kind of a novelty, but just to show you that somebody thinks it was a good idea to stuff all those pixels in something that is only about 5.5 inches. However, I have a Samsung Galaxy 5 that's vintage 2013, 2014. It will record 3840, 2160p video at 30 frames. LG, Sony, Samsung phones all have 16 megapixel plus cameras. So check your menu. You may be pleasantly surprised to see that you can do it. Now, you need to have an advanced version of MHL to be able to connect it to a 4K TV, or you can just get the file off there and play it back in another media device. But 4K is here. I mean, it's in your phones, and Sony did actually show last year an Xperia phone with 4K resolution, which to me is just overkill. And some of you may even have GoPro cameras. They started out doing a 4K camera a couple of years ago. Now everybody and their brother has it. And at CES, we saw numerous companies I never heard of that made 4K action cameras, including this company, Ekin. Can't tell you anything about it. I think they are based in Spain. These are a very small sensor though, so it's not necessarily something that would look as good as a full frame 4K sensor, but it will do 3840, 2160, 30 frames, 420 color. And you can buy it for $200. So when I said commoditized, I mean commoditized. These things have really become cheap. So the display interfaces. Here's where we hit the major speed bump in the road. We need to know the clock rate. It's great to do 4K, it's great to do deep color, it's great to do high frame rates, all this other stuff in HDR, but how many pixels do we need to push through a display interface? So let's go back to that blanking interval I mentioned earlier. 4400 by 2250, that's a standard blanking interval for Ultra HD. If you refresh that 60 times a second, that's 594 megahertz. That's your pixel clock. If you refresh that and you send 8-bit color through it, because of ANSI, mapping of 8-bit words into 10-bit strings, you have to add 2 bits to it. So that's 594 times 3 times 10, 17.82 gigabits a second for 8-bit color. If we go to 12-bit color, or 10-bit rather, that's 21.38 gigabits a second. If we go to 12-bit, that's 24.9. So most TVs will recognize an RGB signal, and they'll recognize 420 color. Some, like Sony, LG, Samsung, will recognize 422. That's a broadcast format. The problem is some TVs that see 422 don't know what to do with it, and they convert it to 420, and the color's all wrong. And the reason that most TVs are set up to do either of these formats is that your streaming content, Ultra HD Blu-ray, cable broadcast, is all coming in as 420. And only desktop PCs and laptops, things like that, would use the RGB format. So HDMI 1.4 has been around for a long time, goes back to the days of 3D, which seemed like a long time ago. It's basically HDMI 1.3 with support for 3D. The maximum data rate is 10.2 gigabits a second. And this is where, if you get nothing else out of this seminar, I want to say to you, don't focus on the resolution, focus on the clock rate. This is where your problems are going to be with roadblocks. So 10.2 gigabits a second is the maximum speed we can punch through this display interface. It doesn't really care how we do it. We just can't go faster than 10.2. So if we do 2160p 24, which is coming off of, let's say, a Blu-ray disc. By the way, you notice a number there, 5500 by 2250. I should mention here, all consumer televisions, except for a PC input specifically marked on the TV, all the inputs are looking for multiples of 74.25. 74.25 megahertz is 720p 60. If we double that, we have 148.5, which is 1080p 60. If we double that, we get to 297, which is 2160p 30. And if we double that, we get to 594, which is 2160p 60. So if the TV doesn't get one of those clock rates, it doesn't quite know what to do with it, and it may default to something like XGA. So to get around that problem with 24 frames, they just increased the blanking interval from 4400 to 5500. So that's where that number came from. So whether it's 24p or 30p, it's 8.91 gigabits a second. Well, yeah, so you can put that through HDMI 1.4. So if somebody says our interface is 4K ready or 4K compatible, don't throw up your hands and go, whoopee, say, well, what version of HDMI are you using? If you're using 1.4, that's okay, but that will only allow you to do 2160p 30 at 8-bit RGB resolution. You can't go any faster than that. If we want to go to 10-bit, can't do it. 17.82. That's too fast. All right, what about the new version? 2.0 goes to 18 gigabits a second. That bought us a little bit more, okay? So we can do all of ones we saw before. Now we can add 2160p 60, 8-bit color, okay? But that's it. If we want to do 10-bit RGB, no can do. Too fast. 21.4 will not fit through this interface. So again, somebody's going to say we're 4K ready. Well, that doesn't mean anything. Okay, you can be 4K ready. Put on the right clothes and go out and say I'm 4K ready. Which version are they running? Is it 1.4? Is it 2.0? The vast majority of products that I've seen so far are still running 1.4. But more and more products are coming out that are using the HDMI 2.0 interface. That's great, but again, keep in mind, if you want to run something off a workstation in RGB color mode with 10-bit color at 60 hertz, you cannot get it through this interface. It's still too slow. Well, so this year at CES, the HDMI licensing group pulled a rabbit out of their hat and announced HDMI 2.1. And they now say they're at 48 gigabits a second. Well, To some extent, that's almost like waving a magic wand and saying bibbidi bobbidi boo, we can now do 48. That's quite a jump from 18. So to jump from 10.2 to 18 to 48, how'd they do it? Well, they changed the way they map things, to cut the overhead down to 11%, 12%. And now, pretty much every resolution I have on this table will pass through it. Even 2160p, RGB, 16-bit color will get through this interface. But the problem with this is we're now kind of in fiber optic territory at 48 gigabits a second. And it's going to be a long time before we see interfaces come to market that can support this. And it's obviously going to require special cabling because the signal losses are going to be insane. So we've seen it, we've heard about it, but it's a long way from being implemented. Remember, it took almost 3.5 years for widespread adoption of HDMI 2.0. It was announced in 2013, and we only really started to see it in widespread use towards the end of 2016. Well, we have another option. We have DisplayPort. And DisplayPort, the current version, not one that's coming, but the current version, has a maximum data rate of 21.6 gigabits a second. Well, that's already faster than HDMI 2.0. And it uses 4 scalable lanes, which, by the way, the newest HDMI version is also going to use 4 scalable lanes with an embedded clock. So we can do 2160p 8-bit at 60 hertz and 2160p 10-bit at 60 hertz already with a version of DisplayPort that's been around since 2009. But it can't do 12-bit or 16-bit. So a newer version of that, which was announced in 2014, is version 1.3. And that goes all the way to 32.4, roughly 8 gigabits a second per lane. So that will pretty much accommodate everything that we want. That'll take us all the way up to 16-bit color without any problems. It also supports something called display stream compression, and it can work through the USB Type-C connector. So your Type-C connector can actually function as a way to transmit power for charging, a way to move data, and in something called alternate mode, it can actually be a display connector. So with version 1.3 and 1.4, you can actually have 3 displays running at the same time. So one 4K display and 2 1080p displays can all be driven through that one interface. Display stream compression. We can now compress the display signal. That's the last link in the chain. It uses an entropy-based, low-latency signal encoding. It's about 3 to 1. They are now working on 4 to 1. The company called Hardent is actually doing most of the lead work on this. So one way to get around this problem of being able to compress the signal through an existing interface is to use this light compression. So an 18 gigabit a second display signal now drops down to 6.0. Well, that's easy. You can get that through HDMI 1.4. So it works with DisplayPort 1.3 and 1.4 and the newest version of HDMI 2.0 and 2.1. And HDMI 1.4 supports high dynamic range and 422 and 420 color, and now we can actually apply some forward error correction, just like we would with MPEG compressed video. So again, the last link in the chain to be compressed was the display connection. Well, now we can actually compress it. Haven't seen a lot of manufacturers adopt it yet, but with this display stream compression, it would be practical for us to be able to drive 8K 60 and 4K 120 hertz picture formats using 420 color. Now your head's probably spinning right now with all those comparisons, so that's why I included this table. And this lists all the current interfaces, and including the ones that haven't come yet but have been announced, and their maximum data rate in the third column, the type of signal format they use. Even though HDMI 2.1 is transition minimized differential signaling, the fact that they're going to go from 3 lanes with a separate clock to 4 lanes with an embedded clock makes them look a lot more like DisplayPort, like a packet system. Maximum resolution is in the middle column. If they support HDR, that's indicated in the next column over. If they support display stream compression, you'll see that. And if they're compatible with USB Type-C, it'll be in the last column. So this is a chart that you want to keep with you when you start to look at specifications for what types of display interfaces are used, and you'll know what you're getting yourself into. High bandwidth digital copy protection, you knew I had to mention it. HDCP version 1 came out in 2001 for DVI. Versions 1 through 1.3, 2006, version 1.4 for 3D. And then version 2 in 2008, a lot of people didn't pay any attention to this, the interface independent adaptation. It will work with any type of interface, not just display, but it'll work with USB. And now we have version 2.2. And this is supposed to be used exclusively with Ultra HD content, which is known in the industry as premium content. Supposedly it was hacked in 2015. There are some aftermarket strippers that people are using to remove HDCP 2.2. Those HD Furies still pop up, even though it's illegal to sell them in this country. It's illegal to import them in this country. So what you need to know, you will see some 4K stuff that says it's HDMI 1.4, but HDCP 2.2. And the reason they're doing that is so that you can play a Blu-ray disc through it. Because again, I showed you earlier that a Blu-ray disc at 24 frames or 30 frames will pass through HDMI 1.4. So they don't have to pay for the more expensive, faster HDMI chipset, but that content's going to be encoded with version 2.2 of copy protection. So that gives us kind of a weird hybrid. It adds a locality check for more security. Those of you who have used HDCP and have had problems connecting it know it flashes about every second and a half. Well, with HDCP 2.2, your source to sink connection needs a response from the sink in 20 milliseconds or less after you hot plug it. If it doesn't see it, connection shuts down. You'll never see anything on the screen, just be blank. This is really robust encryption, 1024-bit, 3072-bit keys. So again, watch the AV gear. You may see an older version of HDMI, but a newer version of HDCP. And early Ultra HD displays will not support 2.2. They won't recognize it, so you may not be able to use them with premium content. Can we do it over wireless? Yes. 60 gig. Wireless is here, 802.11ad. Qualcomm and Intel have shown the ability to stream up to 3 gigabits a second in 2 gigahertz channels using this technology, which is great for doing a wireless 4K connection. Here's a phone made by LATV. It's 802.11d, super fast downloading video at 2.2 gigabits a second. A whole bunch of tri-band modems in the Qualcomm booth from last year at CES. A company called Paraso, who's in Toronto, has retrofit plugins for USB 2.0 ports, so you can send content wirelessly through a 2.0 port to another device at up to 3 gigabits a second. So you can do really fast peer-to-peer file swaps or wireless 4K. It's in-room only. It uses short-range line-of-sight links to work. Where do we get the content from? Well, you can buy a Roku 4 streaming media box, although you may need to get a new one because of the copy protection issues with 2.2. It's $129. So if there's streaming content like Netflix, Hulu, Amazon does some streaming in 4K. They support both H.264 and some support H.265 or Google's version of it called VP9. But they're only supporting, again, the older HDMI interface, which is limited, again, to 2160p, 24, and 30. Sony and Samsung have come out with specialized media players that support version HDMI 2.0, and there's any number of media sidecar boxes you can stick into your television to stream from any of the companies that are listed there. Ultra HD Blu-ray, there's a feeling in the industry that Blu-ray may be going away. People are moving more towards streaming and cloud delivery of video rather than off physical disc. At CES, Panasonic showed 4 new players, 2 without and 2 with Wi-Fi, although they do not currently have a TV to go with them. They did have a very nice 65-inch OLED, which they sell in Canada and they sell in Europe, but they don't sell here. We're not sure why. LG has a new Ultra HD Blu-ray player coming to market, supports HDR10 and Dolby Vision. The HDMI 2.0 output is for the video, and 1.4 is the multi-channel Dolby Atmos audio, which is 22 channels of audio. And it's coming to broadcast. At NAB, there was a whole demo of ATSC 3.0. So this is a new version of digital television that works really more like an IP network. You can stream it to anything from your phone to your television over a Wi-Fi network, and it is capable of transmitting Ultra HD with high dynamic range and wide color gamut. Don't look for it tomorrow, but there are some preliminary tests that are happening with it now. And the NAB is encouraging stations to experiment with it. And you may have heard the NAB, the FCC rather, just auctioned off all TV channels above 38. They will no longer be available for things like wireless audio and TV broadcasting. So we have to repack the spectrum, and ATSC 3.0 may provide us the efficiency to be able to do that. We can deliver it over a standard TCP/IP network. We have to have forward error correction, which will introduce some latency. 40 to 80 megabits a second using 264 for 4K. 265, probably 20 to 40 megabits a second. Netflix says that you can do 15 megabits a second over a network connection. You can watch their 4K. And Fraunhofer Institute in Europe has actually demonstrated Ultra HD with wide color gamut at as low as 16 megabits a second. So it can be done. And we have a couple minutes left, so I'm going to wrap things up with a little discussion of things you can do with UHD imaging. This on your left is an amazing demonstration from this year's NAB. It is a panoramic camera that all the cameras add up to give you 10K resolution in a 360-degree circle. And you can zoom into any area of interest and have over 2K resolution. So very, very clever way of doing virtual reality. Again, not a product, just a concept demonstration. So if we're designing for 4K, and let's assume that we have 4K displays available to us, which we will pretty soon, since we have 4 times the resolution of 2K, that's good, but they tend to be much larger. Commercial models will start at 55 inches, probably go to 110, maybe even 120 inches. So do you use one large 4K display or maybe 4 smaller tile displays? You have weight and installation issues with your big screens. You have no mullions, though, with a single 4K display if you don't want mullions, but it's a lot heavier. You can go tile or you can go one piece, then you get into replacement cost logistics issues. Do you go bigger with shorter viewing distances? Do you make an immersive? As the commercial screens come out, would you consider doing a curved immersive display? Large venue projection, you can do higher resolution on flat and curved screens with projectors, and the LEDs are getting there too, so that's another battle. Do you go LED or projection? Do you use rear projection or direct view? Because as I just showed you, the prices for large 4K displays are falling to where 1080p display levels are now, so people will trade up. And then again, how are you going to connect the signals to it? How are you going to get all this information into the display? So on the left, there's 4 55-inch 2K LCD monitors. That gives you a 110-inch diagonal image with 4K, okay, using 2K monitors, excuse me. It's inexpensive to put together. The monitors are not heavy. It's not difficult to install, but it's going to require some additional outboard image processing so you can tile the segments of the image to each one of those displays. On the right, you have a single 110-inch 4K display, no mullions, one video driver, but it's going to weigh a lot more than any of those 55-inchers. It's going to be a little bit more difficult to install because of the size. If you have fast enough graphics card and you're using the right display interface, you can drive the entire display through one single interface to it. You can have some other fun here. You can take 4 55-inch 4K monitors, you can tile them to give you a 110-inch 8K display. Not particularly difficult to install it, but it will require tons of outboard video processing because now we have 16 times the resolution of what we were doing with 2K. And we can daisy chain them. So if you're going to do this, you have to make sure your interfaces are fast enough. HDBaseT, currently, even version 2.0, is still only fast enough to do HDMI 1.4 speeds, or 10.2 gigabits a second. Whereas DisplayPort 1.2 can go much faster than that. It can go up to 21.6. And that can link through copper or fiber. DisplayPort natively supports a fiber interface. You could also use multiple HD SDI copper links, but you'd need 4 of them for each 4K display, so that gets to be a bit of wiring. And the other thing you need to take in consideration is you don't exceed the bandwidth of your Cat5, Cat6 extenders. So that brings us to our conclusion, and I'm going to wrap up these questions. It's more than just additional pixels when we talk about 4K. Screen sizes start as small as 43 inches and go up from there. LCD technology obviously continues to dominate with new enhancements like quantum dots. Red, green, blue, white OLED displays are now in the marketplace. High dynamic range has arrived in consumer Ultra HD TVs, and it will soon show up in commercial displays. Wider color spaces will accompany HDR, and higher frame rate video will follow in the next few years. Both digital light processing and LCOS support 4K. The 3LCD is still yet to get on board. HDMI 2.0, as wonderful as it sounds, it is barely fast enough to accommodate what we want to do with 4K. DisplayPort 1.2 would be a better choice. DisplayPort 1.4, which is 1.3 with the enhancements, is even a better choice. HDMI 2.1, when it gets here, would probably be the best choice. But at that point, we may be doing everything over a network. 8-bit color is totally inadequate for 4K. We really need to use 10-bit, especially if we're going to do the enhancements like HDR, and we may even need to use 12-bit in some cases. And to get 4K content from the cloud will depend on the use of the HEVC, H.265 codec, and also Google's VP9 codecs. If you're watching YouTube video, that's VP9. That's all being served up and coded in the VP9 format, which is remarkably similar to HEVC if you look at how they both work. So with all that, I hope I've given you some things to think about. I don't know how many are going to be going to InfoComm next week, but You saw some of the acronyms, you know what they mean, you'll understand some of the trends. You should always pay attention to the display interfacing thing. Don't be hesitant to be a PITA and asking what version of HDMI are you using, what version of DisplayPort are you using. Just because somebody says it supports 4K doesn't mean it supports all versions of 4K. It may support a very low-level version of it. And we need to think about where we're going to get content from. The content universe is still being built out. Is it going to come off optical disc? Is it going to be streaming? My bets are probably streaming. A lot of it's going to be delivered via the cloud because internet connections are getting faster and faster. You will see numerous companies next week showing low latency 4K through a 10 gig Ethernet switch. Well, I already showed you. You can do uncompressed RGB, 30 hertz, 2160p, and it's 8.9 gigabits a second. That will go through a 10 gigabit a second switch. Nothing magical about it. You don't even need to compress it. But if you decide to compress it with something like Motion JPEG or JPEG 2000, which can probably do about 4:1 before it starts to break up, you could, in theory, do 60 hertz through a 10 gig switch. The question is the latency issue. So armed with all that knowledge, I am sure you will go out, you will ask good questions, and be better off for it as we transition to this wacky world of Ultra HD TV. Maybe I will see some of you in my class next week. The Ultra HD is here. Deal with it. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for coming out today. And again, if you have questions, please post them in the chat box. We will answer all questions by email. And make sure that you, if you want the RU, to ask Jamie to prepare a certificate for you for this class to keep your CTS current. And that will conclude our presentation. Thank you very much for taking some time out of your day, and go forth and ask better questions.